Today we are looking at a moment that almost destroyed the Jedi Order without anyone realizing it. The premature activation of Clone Trooper Tup's inhibitor chip during the Battle of Ringo Vinda. In the original timeline, Tup's programming drove him to murder Jedi General Tiplar, beginning the investigation that allowed Fives to come within inches of exposing Order 66. But what if the target standing in front of Tup had been Anakin Skywalker instead? What if one malfunctioning chip killed the Chosen One months before Darth Sidious was ready to turn him into Darth Vader? The immediate tragedy would be enormous, but the real consequences would reach far beyond Anakin's death, because killing the one Jedi Palpatine had spent years grooming would force everyone around the conspiracy to react differently at exactly the moment its secrecy was most fragile. The point of divergence begins on Ringo Vinda during the same campaign in which Tup canonically lost control. The Republic is fighting for a massive ring-shaped space station whose corridors have become a grinding maze of clone troopers, battle droids, artillery positions, and repeated counterattacks. Anakin Skywalker is there with Captain Rex, ARC Trooper 5s, and elements of the 501st, coordinating with other Jedi as Republic forces try to break the Separatist defenses. Tup has already begun showing signs that something is wrong. His concentration slips. He becomes fixated on Jedi. He experiences flashes of hostility that make no sense even to him. The difference in this timeline is simply where he is standing when the malfunction fully overwhelms him. Anakin moves forward through a corridor with Rex and several troopers behind him. The droids have temporarily fallen back, and for a few seconds the squad is reorganizing before the next push. Tup sees Anakin turn. The word Jedi seems to become the only meaningful thing in his mind. The biochip, damaged or degraded in the same way as in canon, does not wait for the legitimate command it was created to enforce. The emergency protocol buried inside him asserts itself early. Before Rex can understand why Tup has raised his blaster, Tup fires. There are versions of this scenario where Anakin senses the shot and deflects it, because his reflexes are extraordinary, and Jedi routinely respond to danger before an ordinary soldier could pull a trigger. That would erase the premise. So for this divergence to matter, the shot has to come in the one circumstance capable of bypassing those reflexes. From a clone Anakin trusts, during a lull, from close range, while Anakin's attention is fixed elsewhere. The 501st is not an enemy formation. Its men are brothers he has fought beside for years. Anakin does not move through his own command, expecting to sense murder from behind him, and the chip's sudden activation gives Tup almost no conscious intent for the Force to warn against before the shot is already fired. The bolt strikes Anakin through the upper torso at close range. Tup fires again before anyone reacts. The second blast turns a catastrophic wound into a fatal one. Rex tackles Tup to the deck while Fives and two troopers rush to Anakin. There is no dramatic duel and no final speech. One of the most powerful Jedi in the Order dies on a Republic military station because a soldier he trusted obeyed an order that had not yet been given. For the 501st, the psychological shock is difficult to overstate. Anakin is not merely their assigned general. Rex and his men have built their battlefield identity around him. Skywalker takes risks other generals would consider reckless, but he takes those risks with his troops rather than spending their lives from a distant command post. He has repeatedly trusted clones to improvise, listened to Rex's judgment, and treated individual troopers as people. The same qualities that often frustrated the Jedi Council made him exceptionally popular with the soldiers under him. Watching one of their own shoot him, therefore, feels like more than the death of a commander. It feels like a betrayal of everything the 501st believes about itself. Tup is horrified when fragments of his normal consciousness return. He does not understand what he has done. He alternates between confusion, agitation, and the same disturbed fixation on killing Jedi that appears in the canonical episode. Rex orders him restrained rather than executed, even though several troopers are ready to kill Tup on the spot. That decision becomes the first reason Sidious's plan begins to unravel. If Rex allowed grief to become revenge, the evidence would die with Tup. Instead, he looks at the man who just killed Anakin and sees something he cannot reconcile with the brother he knows. Fives reaches the same conclusion even faster. He is served with Tup. He knows what combat stress looks like, what panic looks like, and what ordinary disobedience looks like. This is none of those things. Tup did not argue with Anakin, hesitate, or act like a soldier making a decision. He behaved as though a switch had been thrown somewhere inside his mind. Fives has already survived enough impossible situations to distrust the easiest explanation, and Anakin's body lying on the floor makes him far less willing to accept any diagnosis that conveniently ends the inquiry. The battle itself stalls. Republic command cannot simply continue as though nothing happened. The death of General Skywalker creates a command vacuum in the middle of a contested operation, and the 501st is ordered to withdraw from the immediate assault while another Jedi assumes operational control. Rex obeys, but he treats Tup less like a prisoner than like evidence. He orders every helmet recording, biometric log, medical reading, and security feed from the minutes before the shooting preserved. Fives insists on remaining attached to the case. Neither man yet understands inhibitor chips, but both know that if they surrender Tup into a bureaucracy without protecting the evidence, the truth may disappear. The first official explanations arrive almost immediately. Combat fatigue is raised, separatist brainwashing is raised, a neurological pathogen is raised. The Republic has encountered mind control, biological weapons, parasites, and psychological manipulation during the war, so none of those possibilities is absurd. What changes the investigation is the victim. General Tippler's death was serious enough in canon to trigger concern, but Anakin Skywalker is one of the most recognizable military heroes in the Republic. His campaigns have been publicized across the HoloNet. Senators know his name. The Chancellor has repeatedly treated him as a personal friend. The Jedi Council considers him central to the war. There is no realistic way for Kamino to classify his death as an obscure case and dispose of the responsible trooper before anyone asks hard questions. Obi-Wan receives the message while still on active duty. The report is so short that at first he assumes there must be some mistake. Anakin Skywalker, killed by a clone under his own command. He requests confirmation, then requests it again. Obi-Wan has faced Anakin's apparent death before, and learned not to trust battlefield reports too quickly. This time, the medical confirmation is absolute. There is a body. There are witnesses. Rex himself sends the authenticated account. Obi-Wan's grief is immediate, but disciplined. He cannot collapse in front of his troops, and he cannot abandon his command while the war continues. Yet the loss cuts through nearly every part of his life. Anakin was his Padawan, his closest friend, the brother Qui-Gon's dying wish placed in his care. Obi-Wan has spent years worrying that Anakin's recklessness would eventually get him killed. He imagined starfighters, Sith Lords, impossible charges, and self-sacrifice. He never imagined a clone from Anakin's own legion raising a rifle during a pause between battles. The Jedi Council recalls Obi-Wan to Coruscant as soon as the tactical situation allows it. Yoda feels the death through the Force before the full report arrives. The sensation is not merely the loss of a powerful Jedi, it is the sudden extinction of a presence around which the prophecy of the Chosen One has revolved since Qui-Gon brought a 9-year-old boy from Tatooine to the temple. Mace Windu does not know whether the prophecy was misunderstood, interrupted, or simply irrelevant to what has happened. The Council has no language for the possibility that the person they believed might destroy the Sith has been killed by a clone trooper whose mind apparently malfunctioned. Palpatine's private reaction is more violent than anyone sees. Darth Sidious has spent over a decade preparing Anakin Skywalker. He arranged access, encouraged resentment, praised power the Jedi asked Anakin to restrain, and cultivated the idea that the Chancellor understood him better than the Order did. He watched Anakin's fear of losing people and recognized the mechanism by which that fear could eventually be turned into obedience. Dooku was always expendable in that long-term design. The Clone Wars were meant to place Anakin under pressure until the moment Sidious could force a final choice. Tup has just destroyed years of work with 2 blaster bolts. Sidious cannot express that rage publicly. Chancellor Palpatine has to become the grieving statesman. He orders flags lowered, praises Anakin's courage in the Senate, and speaks of a young man who represented the finest ideals of the Republic. He privately summons Dooku through secure channels and demands to know whether the Separatists tampered with the clone. Dooku denies it because, for once, he is telling the truth. The malfunction belongs to the Sith plan itself. That realization turned Sidious's grief into alarm. If a biochip activated early once, then the mechanism designed to destroy the Jedi is not perfectly stable. Dooku understands the danger at once. He knows Tyrannus was involved in taking control of the clone project after Sifo-Dyas initiated it. He knows the clones contain behavioral modifications intended to guarantee obedience when the final command comes. He also knows that Tup is alive and heading toward medical examination. In canon, Dooku and Sidious already reacted urgently when Tiplar was killed. With Anakin dead, their urgency becomes desperation. They need Tup's body, his chip, and every record associated with the incident controlled before the Jedi realize the malfunction points to deliberate programming. Rex makes that control difficult from the beginning. He refuses to let Tup be transferred anywhere without both clone and Jedi witnesses. He formally requests an autopsy order in advance in case Tup dies during treatment, which is unusual, but entirely defensible given the circumstances. Fives copies the combat logs to multiple secure locations. The two clones do not know they are protecting evidence from the Chancellor. They believe they are protecting Anakin's memory from a bureaucracy that will otherwise label his death an accident and move on. Shakti becomes the next crucial variable. As the Jedi overseeing clone training and medical questions on Kamino, she has already spent years negotiating the uneasy boundary between Jedi authority and Kaminoan control. Nalase insists that Tup's condition should be handled according to Kaminoan medical protocols. Shakti listens, but the death of Anakin changes the balance. She is not investigating a trooper who killed a relatively isolated general on a distant front. She is investigating the death of a Jedi Knight whose name is known throughout the Republic and whose former master sits on the Council. Any attempt to euthanize Tup before the cause is established would be politically explosive. Padme Amidala learns the news in private before the Senate announcement. Bail Organa comes to her apartment because Palpatine's office believes she should be informed personally as one of Anakin's known political allies. No one delivering the message understands that she is being told her husband is dead. Padme cannot react as a widow. She cannot demand to see him as family. She cannot publicly say that the man being praised as a hero shared her home whenever war allowed it. The secrecy that protected their marriage now denies her the ordinary rights of grief. For several hours, she remains almost completely alone. C-3PO knows enough to understand her devastation, but cannot give her what she needs. She considers telling Obi-Wan immediately, then stops because she does not know how much Anakin ever admitted to him. By the time Obi-Wan arrives on Coruscant, however, secrecy feels obscene. Padme asks to see him privately and tells him the truth. Anakin was her husband. Obi-Wan is less surprised than she expects. He had long understood that Anakin and Padme's relationship crossed the boundaries Anakin was supposed to maintain, even if he deliberately avoided forcing the confession. Hearing the marriage stated plainly after Anakin's death produces no anger. There is only grief and regret. Obi-Wan realizes that Anakin died carrying a life his master never allowed him to acknowledge openly. Padme realizes that Obi-Wan was closer to understanding them than Anakin believed. Their shared loss creates an alliance neither Palpatine anticipates. Padme cannot investigate as a widow, so she investigates as a senator. She demands hearings on clone neurological safety, military bioengineering oversight, and Kaminoan contractual authority. Her public argument is impossible to dismiss as sentimental. If one clone can suddenly murder General Skywalker without warning, then every senator has to ask whether other clones might suffer the same failure. What happens if a pilot experiences it aboard a capital ship? What happens if a guard unit turns on a government building? What happens if the instability is contagious? The Senate does not need to know the real answer for panic to begin. Palpatine tries to contain the hearings by supporting a limited investigation. He cannot oppose scrutiny too openly without looking as though he is protecting Kamino. Instead, he argues that the Republic must avoid undermining confidence in the clone army during wartime. That position sounds reasonable, but Padme notices the speed with which his office tries to narrow the inquiry. Bail Organa notices too. So does Mon Mothma. None of them suspects Darth Sidious yet, but the Chancellor's political instincts appear unusually invested in keeping the problem medical rather than structural. On Kamino, Tup's condition deteriorates. Nalase repeats the claim that a tumor or virus may be responsible, and pushes for procedures that would keep the examination under Kaminoan control. Fives refuses to leave his brother. Shakti allows AZI-3 to continue independent diagnostic work because the stakes are too high to rely on one medical authority. The same sequence that led to the discovery in canon therefore happens under much heavier scrutiny. AZI-3 locates the organic construct in Tupe's brain. The object does not resemble a natural tumor once it is carefully isolated. It is integrated into neural pathways in a manner consistent with implantation. Nala Se immediately tries to redefine the discovery. She explains that the clones possess behavioral modification chips intended to regulate aggression and ensure stability. The chips, she claims, are normal and necessary. TUPs simply malfunctioned. That explanation does not reassure anyone. It makes the situation worse. Shaak Ti asks the obvious question. Why was the Jedi Order never informed that every clone carried an organic device capable of altering behavior? Nala Se invokes the original specifications of the clone army and insists the implant was part of the design authorized by the project's creator. She references Sifo Dyas, just as the Kaminoans relied on the dead Jedi Master's name in canon to make the safeguards sound legitimate. Fives does not believe her. Rex is not on Kamino for every stage of the examination, but he remains in constant contact. The idea that Anakin died because an officially installed chip malfunctioned transforms his grief into suspicion. If the chip can compel one clone to murder a Jedi, what exactly was it built to compel the others to do? The question is so direct that Nala Se repeatedly avoids answering it. Fives insists on being scanned. The Kaminoans resist. Shaak Ti authorizes it. AZI-3 discovers the same organic construct in Fives. Additional clones are tested under controlled conditions, and the same result appears again. The device is not a unique defect inside TUP. It is universal architecture. At this point, the Council can no longer treat Anakin's death as an isolated battlefield tragedy. Shaak Ti sends the findings directly to Yoda and Mace Windu before Palpatine's physicians can take custody of TUP's remains. Obi-Wan joins the emergency session. Plo Koon argues that the clones themselves may be victims of a hidden design. Mace focuses on the military danger. Yoda focuses on the origin of the army. Every path leads back to the same unresolved question the Jedi accepted at Geonosis, because they had no alternative. Who truly created the clone army, and why? Rex is brought into the council chamber alongside Fives. It is unusual for clone officers to participate so directly in a strategic Jedi meeting, but Anakin's death has made their testimony indispensable. Rex describes TUP before the incident. No ideological hatred of Jedi, no history of insubordination, no behavior suggesting he planned murder. Fives explains the fixation he witnessed and the discovery on Kamino. When he says he believes the chip forced TUP to act, no one in the room dismisses him as paranoid. This is the point where the alternate timeline diverges most sharply from canon. In the original sequence, Fives was isolated, drugged, manipulated, and eventually pushed into a desperate attempt to warn Anakin and Rex after his meeting with Palpatine. Here, Anakin is already dead. There is no need for Fives to convince him. More importantly, the Council itself has already taken possession of the evidence because the victim was too important for the Kaminoans to control the inquiry. Palpatine cannot quietly bring Fives into his office and frame the entire story around a supposedly unstable clone without the Jedi demanding to know why. The Council orders a secret second phase of testing. Rex volunteers first. Cody is summoned under the cover of routine medical review. Wolf, Bly, and several other senior commanders are examined by Jedi healers and Republic doctors, who do not report to Kamino. Every scan confirms the same thing. A biological chip has been implanted in every clone from embryonic development. Its exact programming remains encrypted or biologically inaccessible, but its location and structure are consistent enough to prove deliberate design. The revelation creates a military nightmare. There are millions of clone troopers deployed across the galaxy, many of them physically beside Jedi generals. If TUP's malfunction can happen spontaneously, any one of those units could become dangerous without warning. If the chip is not merely defective, but contains an intentional command protocol, then the entire Grand Army may be a weapon aimed at the people commanding it. Mace Windu orders the information restricted to the smallest possible circle. Publicly exposing it before they understand the mechanism could collapse the Republic front overnight. Separatist commanders would exploit the panic. Worlds protected by clone garrisons might revolt. Senators could demand immediate demobilization of the only army capable of holding Grievous back. Yet doing nothing is impossible after Anakin's death. The compromise is a neurological audit disguised as a response to combat stress. Senior clone officers and units rotating through major medical facilities are scanned. Where feasible, chips are removed from commanders without public explanation. Rex undergoes the procedure willingly. Cody is deeply disturbed but accepts Obi-Wan's request. Wolf is suspicious of the politics surrounding the decision but trusts Plo Koon. Bly and others respond according to their relationships with their Jedi generals. The first wave is small, but it creates something Sidious never intended. An expanding group of command-level clones who can no longer be controlled by Order 66. The surgeries also answer a practical question. Removing the chips does not destroy discipline, intelligence, or loyalty. Rex remains Rex. Cody remains Cody. The men do not become unstable or violently independent. Nala Se's claim that the implants are necessary to prevent clone aggression immediately looks weaker. The device has a purpose, but whatever that purpose is, ordinary military function does not require it. Padme's Senate investigation begins intersecting with the Jedi inquiry. She obtains procurement records showing how much authority Kamino retained over genetic maintenance and how often oversight was routed through classified defense channels. Bale's staff discovers contracts signed under designations connected to the original Clone Commission, rather than ordinary Senate appropriations. None of this points directly to Palpatine, because Sidious was far too careful to sign his own name beneath a secret extermination program. What it does show is that the clone army contains layers of authority that predate the war and were never properly reviewed by the Senate. For Palpatine, every day the investigation continues is a strategic disaster. Anakin's death is the first catastrophe. The chip discovery is the second. The Sith plan can survive losing Anakin. It can even survive losing Dooku if necessary. What it cannot easily survive is the Jedi neutralizing the mechanism designed to kill them before the command is issued. Sidious discusses the crisis with Dooku in secret. Dooku realizes his own position has changed dramatically. In the original plan, he never knew every detail of how Sidious intended to replace him, but he understood Anakin was powerful, and that his master was interested in the young Jedi. With Anakin dead, Dooku suddenly becomes much more valuable. Sidious cannot afford to discard an experienced Sith apprentice, while simultaneously managing a compromised clone conspiracy. The Battle of Coruscant, as originally envisioned, with Dooku playing the defeated captive who pushes Anakin toward murder, no longer has a purpose. That does not mean Dooku is safe forever. Sith relationships do not become healthy because one alternative dies. Sidious will replace Dooku if a stronger candidate appears, and Dooku knows it. Maul exists, but Sidious views him as a rival legacy and a threat to be controlled rather than a trustworthy successor. Savage Opress is powerful but crude. Asajj Ventress has been discarded and hates both Dooku and Sidious. The galaxy contains dark side talent, but none of it offers the combination of power, access, emotional leverage, and public heroism Anakin represented. Sidious, therefore, keeps Dooku while searching for another path. That creates a subtle change in the war. Dooku is no longer a sacrificial piece, whose death can be scheduled near the finish. He becomes the likely enforcer of the post-war Sith regime if Order 66 still succeeds. Sidious gives him more reason to preserve himself and more responsibility for eliminating evidence around the clone project. The first target is Kamino. Dooku cannot openly destroy the facilities without revealing separatist interest in the investigation, but covert teams begin attacking data relays, assassinating contractors, and eliminating personnel who know too much about the original specifications. Nala Se receives orders through Tyrannus-linked channels to protect the secret at all costs. Lama Su understands that the Kaminoan government's survival may depend on keeping both the Jedi and Senate from learning how deeply the Sith shaped the project. That pressure backfires. Shakti notices that records begin disappearing only after the Council starts asking about the chips. Clone intelligence intercepts an attempted intrusion into restricted Kaminoan archives. The intruder uses separatist encryption associated with high-level intelligence operations. Suddenly, the possibility that the chips were merely an eccentric safeguard ordered by Sifo Dyas becomes much harder to defend. Why would the separatists care enough to erase the files? Obi-Wan proposes reopening the Sifo Dyas investigation immediately. In canon, that mystery eventually leads him and Anakin to Obadiah, where they discover that a man called Tyrannus hired the Pikes to kill Sifo Dyas, and later learn that Tyrannus is Count Dooku. Here, the investigation begins under far greater urgency because Anakin's death has already demonstrated that something hidden in the clone army can kill Jedi. The old mystery is no longer historical, it is active. The loss of Anakin changes who accompanies Obi-Wan. Plo Koon becomes a logical partner for parts of the investigation because of his standing on the council and his close relationship with the clones. Mace Windu remains involved from Coruscant. Ahsoka, though no longer a Jedi, becomes another unexpected connection. Rex contacts her privately because Anakin's death concerns her as deeply as anyone outside Padme and Obi-Wan. She returns to Coruscant for the memorial and learns that Tup's behavior may have been programmed. Ahsoka's reaction is anger sharpened by recent experience. She has already learned what it feels like when institutions decide on a convenient explanation before all the evidence has been examined. When Rex tells her the Kaminoans initially wanted Tup's condition classified and contained, she immediately understands why Fives refused to stop digging. She cannot order Jedi investigations anymore, but she can help Rex think outside the procedures that failed her during the temple bombing case. Anakin's memorial becomes a public event and a private wound. The Jedi speak about sacrifice and service. Clones from the 501st stand in formation without their general. Padme attends as a senator and must remain several steps away from the place she wants to stand. Obi-Wan delivers words about a former Padawan who never learned how to retreat from danger. Rex does not speak publicly because he is afraid his grief will become anger. Fives watches the ceremony and silently decides that whatever the chip is, he will not allow Anakin's death to become a classified footnote. The 501st cannot remain without a general. Republic High Command initially considers dividing its battalions among existing formations, but the Legion's experience is too valuable. Several Jedi rotate through command before a more stable arrangement is made. The most likely long-term solution is closer integration with Obi-Wan's 212th during major operations, because Rex already has a working relationship with Cody, and Obi-Wan understands Anakin's troops better than most Jedi. This does not literally erase the 501st, but it changes its identity. Under Anakin, the Legion operated with unusual tactical freedom. He frequently accepted aggressive maneuvers and gave Rex room to improvise. Obi-Wan is flexible, but more methodical. Other generals are even more conservative. The 501st remains elite, yet the pace of its campaign slows. Some operations that Anakin might have ended through a reckless flanking strike become longer sieges. Clone casualties can either fall because fewer insane risks are taken, or rise because wars of attrition last longer. The difference depends on the battlefield. Ringo Vinda itself takes longer to secure. Anakin's death halts momentum and forces command reorganization. Separatist propaganda exploits the event without understanding its cause, claiming that Republic forces are collapsing internally. Grievous orders attacks designed to take advantage of confusion. The Republic eventually stabilizes the front, but the loss demonstrates how much operational dependence had accumulated around a small number of famous Jedi generals. Umbara has already occurred by this point, so Anakin's absence cannot change Krell's betrayal there. What it changes are the later Outer Rim campaigns and the final approach to Coruscant. The Republic loses one of its most effective pilots, one of its best improvisational commanders, and the General Palpatine repeatedly used as a public symbol. The war becomes slightly harder to manage on the battlefield, at the same time Sidious needs it to remain tightly managed politically. The neurological audits make that military strain worse in the short term. Units are rotated out of combat for screening. Senior commanders disappear into medical facilities. Rumors spread among clones that the Republic believes they are defective. Rex argues that secrecy cannot become dehumanization. If the Jedi treat every trooper as a potential assassin, they will destroy the trust that made units like the 501st effective in the first place. Yoda agrees. The Council therefore instructs Jedi generals to explain enough truth to selected commanders to preserve cooperation. The clones are told that an implanted device has been linked to Tup's behavior, and that removal is being studied. They are not told that the Council fears a deliberate anti-Jedi command until the evidence becomes stronger. Even that partial honesty has consequences. Clones begin asking why something was placed in their brains without their consent. For the first time, the inhibitor chip crisis becomes a clone rights crisis before the Empire exists. Padme seizes on the issue in the Senate. If the clones are sentient soldiers capable of loyalty, friendship, judgment, and moral choice, then secretly installing behavioral controls makes their status as Republic property even more indefensible. Bail and Mon Mothma support an independent commission. Palpatine publicly agrees that the soldiers deserve protection, while privately working to ensure the commission never reaches the real program. This political fight strengthens the bond between Padme and Rex. They cannot openly discuss Anakin as the man both of them loved in different ways, but they share a determination that his death has to mean something. Rex provides anonymized testimony about clone autonomy. Padme pushes for legal rights. Fives becomes the living symbol of the investigation, though the Council tries to keep his identity out of the press for his own safety. The Kaminoans become increasingly trapped. If they admit the true purpose of the chips, they expose their role in a conspiracy to murder the Jedi. If they deny knowing anything, the design records contradict them. Lama Su argues that Kamino fulfilled the contract it was given. Nala Si insists the chips were ordered by Tyrannus under the authority attached to the original clone project. That name becomes the most important lead in the entire investigation. At first, Tyrannus is only a designation. The Jedi have encountered it before in fragments, but they have not yet fully connected it to Dooku. The Sifo Dyas inquiry accelerates. The trail leads toward the Pikes and Obadiah. The difference from canon is that the Jedi now arrive expecting the mystery to connect directly to the clone army's hidden programming. They are less willing to accept partial answers and more willing to deploy intelligence resources to secure witnesses. Silman becomes critical. In canon, he survived the attack on Sifo Dyas' shuttle and was secretly held by the Pikes until Dooku arrived and killed him before he could reveal too much. In this timeline, the Jedi move more quickly and with greater security because the stakes are already understood. Dooku still tries to eliminate Silman, but the attempt is harder when Obi-Wan is not arriving with Anakin on an exploratory mission. The Council sends a larger extraction team, and clone intelligence monitors approaches to the Pike facility. Whether Silman survives every version of the confrontation is uncertain, but the Pikes themselves still possess the decisive information. Tyrannus hired them to kill Sifo Dyas. Their testimony, combined with Kaminoan references to Tyrannus and the implanted chips, proves that the same hidden actor sits behind both the murder of the Jedi who commissioned the army and the modification of the soldiers created afterward. When Dooku appears to clean up the evidence, the connection becomes almost impossible to deny. Obi-Wan recognizes what the name means when the confrontation reveals Dooku as Tyrannus. The discovery is horrifying. The Jedi have spent the entire Clone Wars leading an army whose creation was taken over by their Sith enemy. They already suspected the clone project had mysteries. Now they know the enemy they are fighting helped build the soldiers standing beside them. This is the point where Fives becomes vindicated beyond argument. Tup did not simply suffer a medical defect. A Sith-controlled project placed hidden devices inside every clone, and one of those devices compelled him to murder Anakin Skywalker. The Council no longer needs to know the exact command phrase to understand the existential threat. Whatever the final purpose is, allowing the chips to remain is indefensible. Mass removal begins. It cannot happen instantly. The Grand Army is enormous, medical resources are finite, and operating on millions of soldiers during an active war is logistically impossible in a matter of days. The Council therefore prioritizes units serving directly beside Jedi, beginning with commanders and officers who could transmit orders downward. Medical droids are taught standardized extraction techniques. Ships receive updated scanners. Clone units rotate through procedures under the cover of an emergency neurological safety directive, approved after General Skywalker's death. Some chips are disabled rather than physically removed when surgery is too risky, or facilities are inadequate. Scientists work on biochemical and electronic ways to interrupt their function. AZI-3's data becomes the foundation of the program. Kix and other clone medics are brought into the effort because no one understands clone physiology better than the men treating each other in the field. The removals transform the relationship between clones and Jedi. Cody wakes from surgery and realizes that Obi-Wan trusted him enough to explain why the procedure mattered. Rex watches more of his brothers become free from a command they never knew existed. Wolf becomes fiercely protective of his unit's medical independence. Bly and other commanders react according to personality, but the overall effect is the same. The Jedi are no longer simply generals. They are helping the clones reclaim control over their own minds. Sidious cannot wait indefinitely. Every chip removed is one less soldier guaranteed to turn on a Jedi when Order 66 is issued. He considers activating the command early. The problem is that the political conditions are not ready. The Jedi are still respected. The war has not reached the planned climax. Grievous is alive and useful. Dooku is alive and now necessary. There is no Darth Vader to lead the temple assault. If Sidious triggers the purge immediately, he risks revealing himself before the Jedi are sufficiently dispersed and before the Republic can be transformed into an empire without resistance. For perhaps the first time in years, Darth Sidious is genuinely reacting rather than orchestrating. Anakin's random death has taken the galaxy off the track he designed. Palpatine's first counterattack is political rather than military. He questions whether the Jedi Council has the constitutional authority to alter the clone army without Senate approval. The argument is carefully constructed. The clones are Republic assets funded by the government, not property of the Jedi Order. Secret surgeries performed by Jedi commanders can therefore be framed as unilateral interference with national defense. Palpatine does not say the chips should remain. He says oversight matters, knowing that every layer of oversight buys him time. Padme destroys that argument more effectively than the Council can. She points out that the Senate never authorized the implants either. If the Chancellor wants legislative authority to matter, then Kamino must explain why millions of soldiers were delivered with undisclosed neural devices commissioned through a chain now linked to Count Dooku. The debate becomes impossible to contain. Senators who normally support Palpatine begin demanding answers because no one wants to discover that a hidden switch exists inside the troops guarding their own worlds. Masameda works behind the scenes to limit subpoenas. Sly Moore quietly monitors which senators are asking the most dangerous questions. Palpatine's inner circle begins functioning less like an administration, managing a war, and more like a defensive perimeter, protecting the Chancellor from evidence. Bail notices that pattern. Mon Mothma notices it. Padme, already grieving and angry, notices it most of all. She begins comparing dates. Emergency powers expanded after crises that somehow benefited Palpatine politically. The clone army appeared exactly when the Republic needed it. Dooku, now identified as Tyrannus, was involved in the army's hidden origin while publicly leading the enemy. The banking clan, trade federation, techno-union, and other corporate powers have repeatedly profited from both sides of the conflict. None of this proves Palpatine is Sidious, but it suggests the war has been structured to preserve itself. Obi-Wan reaches the same conclusion from the military side. Dooku has had countless opportunities to destroy Republic forces, but often behaves as though the strategic objective is pressure rather than victory. Grievous is allowed to terrorize worlds, but rarely receives the kind of overwhelming support that could let him conquer the core outright. The Republic likewise wins enough to survive without ending the conflict. Once Obi-Wan stops assuming the Sith want a conventional separatist victory, the war begins to look like a machine designed to centralize power. Yoda is disturbed by the implication. The Jedi believed they were defending the Republic from a Sith-led rebellion. If Dooku and his unseen master shaped the army used to fight that rebellion, then the Jedi may have been placed deliberately at the center of a conflict meant to compromise them. Their role as generals, once accepted as a necessity, now appears as part of the trap. Fives pushes the Council further. He asks a question none of the Masters enjoys hearing. If the chips were designed by the enemy and can force a clone to kill a Jedi, why assume Tup's malfunction was the only relevant command? The simplest explanation is that the chips contain an order intended for all clones. Perhaps there are many contingency commands. Perhaps the anti-Jedi behavior is one among them. The Jedi need the programming, not just the hardware. AZI-3 and Republic scientists begin dissecting removed chips at the molecular level. The devices are organic enough that ordinary decryption methods do not apply, but their interaction with clone neurology reveals patterns. Certain pathways correspond to suppression of independent judgment under high-priority stimuli. The chip appears designed not merely to suggest an action, but to override resistance. Rex realizes what that means before the scientists say it aloud. The loyalty he feels toward his Jedi general could have been erased by a command. Anakin's death becomes the proof of concept. Tup knew Anakin. He had fought under him. None of that mattered when the malfunction activated. The chip did not persuade Tup that Anakin was an enemy. It made the distinction irrelevant. Clone morale becomes fragile as more troopers learn the truth. Some men are furious at Kamino. Others are frightened by the idea that thoughts inside their own heads might not belong to them. A few react defensively and insist the chips must have a legitimate purpose, because accepting the alternative means acknowledging that their creators never trusted them to choose. Rex speaks to units whenever he can. He tells them that removing the chip does not make them less disciplined. It makes their loyalty meaningful because it can finally be chosen. Fives becomes central to that message. His investigation no longer ends with Commander Fox shooting him in a Coruscant warehouse. He survives because he never reaches the same isolated, drugged, desperate position. Instead of being remembered by only a few clones as the brother who tried to warn them, he becomes the ARC trooper who proves they were all modified without consent. That survival changes Rex profoundly. He does not have to carry Five's last words as a mystery for months. He gets to stand beside him while they fix the thing Fives discovered. Palpatine realizes Fives has become almost impossible to eliminate discreetly. If the clone suddenly dies, everyone will suspect foul play. If he is arrested, Padme's committee will demand access. If he is discredited, the physical evidence remains. Sidious therefore changes tactics. He tries to make the investigation itself appear dangerous to the war effort. Separatist attacks intensify along fronts, where clone units are rotating out for medical screening. Grievous is ordered to exploit the temporary reduction in Republic readiness. Worlds fall. Convoys are destroyed. HoloNet reports begin asking whether the Jedi's obsession with a rare medical malfunction is costing civilian lives. Palpatine never directly says the surgeries should stop. He lets battlefield casualties ask the question for him. The strategy works on some senators. They argue that the Republic cannot pull millions of troops from combat based on a theoretical danger. Padme responds that Anakin Skywalker is dead, which makes the danger anything but theoretical. She cannot say husband, but the anger in her voice carries enough force that Bail understands what she is really defending. Obi-Wan faces the same dilemma in command. Every battalion sent for screening leaves another front exposed. He cannot protect Jedi by allowing civilian systems to collapse. The Council begins using a staggered model. Forward units are scanned in place, commanders are prioritized, and only positive or suspicious cases receive immediate extraction when surgical resources are limited. The process is slower than anyone wants, but it prevents the Republic from abandoning entire sectors. Dooku takes advantage of the confusion to reclaim initiative. Without Anakin, several Republic strike operations that would have targeted key Separatist positions never occur in the same way. Dooku personally leads more campaigns because Sidious needs his apprentice visible, dangerous, and indispensable. At the same time, Dooku begins preparing for the possibility that his master's plan is failing. This is one of the most interesting changes created by Anakin's death. Dooku was never loyal to Sidious in the way Rex was loyal to Anakin. Their relationship is Sith hierarchy. Dooku serves because he believes Sidious will deliver a new order in which Dooku has power, and because he knows challenging his master prematurely would be fatal. If the clone conspiracy is collapsing, and Sidious no longer possesses the apprentice he intended to elevate, Dooku has reason to reassess how much of the grand plan still benefits him. He starts protecting his own assets. Records on Sereno are moved or destroyed. Financial channels linked to Tyrannus are rerouted. Personal communications are compartmentalized. Dooku recalls agents who know too much and eliminates others. He cannot erase everything because the Confederacy is vast and because the Sith plan has touched countless institutions over more than a decade. Every attempt to clean the trail leaves another sign that someone is cleaning it. Clone intelligence and Jedi investigators raid Sereno-linked facilities before the archives can disappear completely. The Republic does not simply seize Dooku's ancestral palace in one effortless operation. Sereno is protected and politically important, but intelligence teams penetrate banking records, logistics companies, shell corporations, and estates belonging to Dooku's allies. They find transfers associated with Kaminoan subcontractors and Pike intermediaries. Again, there is no document labeled Order 66 signed by Palpatine. The conspiracy was never that careless. What emerges is a network connecting Dooku's private wealth, Tyrannus, the Clone Project, and institutions on Coruscant that received preferential access under wartime secrecy. Those Coruscant connections are the dangerous part. Some lead to bureaucrats who genuinely knew nothing. Others lead to defense offices created or expanded under Palpatine's emergency powers. A handful terminate in accounts administered through the Chancellor's executive security apparatus. That is not enough to arrest Palpatine for being a Sith Lord, but it is enough to make Mace Windu stop treating him as merely the politician standing closest to the conspiracy. Padme's committee uncovers a similar pattern independently. The Chancellor's office repeatedly intervened to protect classified aspects of clone procurement from normal audit. Palpatine can justify each intervention as wartime necessity. Taken together, however, they show that he had more visibility into the clone program than he has admitted publicly. Bail asks Padme the question she has been avoiding. Did Anakin ever tell her anything about Palpatine that seemed unusual? Padme thinks back through years of conversations. Anakin trusted Palpatine deeply. He often went to the Chancellor when frustrated with the Council. Palpatine knew details about Anakin's emotional life that most Jedi did not. Padme once viewed that relationship as useful because Anakin needed someone outside the Order who listened to him. Now she wonders why the most powerful politician in the Republic invested so much personal attention in one young Jedi. Obi-Wan has the same realization from the other direction. He remembers Anakin defending Palpatine reflexively. He remembers the Chancellor taking unusual interest in his promotions and assignments. He remembers moments when Palpatine's political interventions seemed designed to place Anakin in emotionally difficult positions. Without Anakin alive to feel betrayed by the suspicion, Obi-Wan can examine the relationship more clinically than he ever could in canon. The Council begins quietly surveilling Palpatine. That step would have been extraordinarily dangerous under normal circumstances. The Jedi are not supposed to spy on the elected head of the Republic merely because they dislike his policies. But this is no longer a political disagreement. They have evidence that the Sith controlled the clone army's hidden design, evidence that Dooku is tyrannous, evidence that executive offices obstructed oversight, and testimony from Fives that the Chancellor personally sought access to the chip investigation. The possibility that Sidious operates somewhere in Palpatine's immediate circle becomes unavoidable. Yoda cautions against assuming Palpatine himself is the Sith Lord. Sidious could be an advisor, intelligence chief, senator, or hidden official manipulating the Chancellor. Mace agrees in principle. In practice, surveillance of Palpatine's circle keeps producing strange absences, encrypted channels, and security gaps that converge around the Chancellor more often than anyone else. Palpatine senses the danger. He has spent years clouding the Jedi's perception through the dark side, but the Force is not the only investigative tool available to them. Financial records, clone medical data, testimony, and communications analysis do not need precognition. Sidious can hide his presence from meditation more easily than he can explain why every trail ends near his office. He therefore prepares a contingency. If the Jedi move against him, he will issue Order 66 immediately, regardless of how many chips have been removed. The remaining clones can still kill thousands of Jedi across the galaxy. He also orders Dooku to position separatist fleets for a simultaneous offensive against Republic command centers. The goal is no longer the elegant conversion of a Republic victory into an empire. It is survival through chaos. Dooku recognizes that this plan may leave him ruling the Separatists, while Sidious rules whatever remains of the Republic. That is not the promised future, but it gives Dooku room to maneuver. He quietly keeps some fleets outside the positions Sidious requests. If his master falls, Dooku intends to survive. The Jedi accelerate chip removal again. By this point, Rex, Cody, Wolf, Bly, and many senior officers have been freed from the programming. The process has reached significant portions of units closest to the Temple and major Jedi commands, though nowhere near the entire Grand Army. This matters enormously. Order 66 was designed as a decentralized massacre. Jedi were supposed to be surrounded by trusted troops who would turn instantly and without warning. Even partial removal destroys that uniformity. Some Jedi generals now serve beside mixed units in which officers have been cleared, but ordinary troopers have not. That creates a dangerous command problem. If the Order activates, free commanders may have to fight their own men. Rex begins planning for exactly that possibility. He develops emergency procedures for disarming affected clones with stun weapons, isolating communications, and shutting down helmet receivers if a suspicious command reaches the network. Cody works with Obi-Wan on similar contingencies in the 212th. The idea that Cody might need to protect Obi-Wan from his own battalion is painful to both of them, but neither avoids the conversation. Their honesty makes the bond stronger. In canon, Order 66 turns Cody from a trusted companion into Obi-Wan's executioner in seconds. Here, that future is being dismantled months before Palpatine can trigger it. Ahsoka remains outside the formal command structure, but helps Rex test procedures. Because she is no longer a Jedi, the chip's anti-Jedi command might still identify her depending on how targets are defined. No one wants to test the programming by activating it deliberately. Instead, they assume she is at risk and develop the same protections around her. The irony is not lost on Ahsoka. Leaving the Order may not matter to a biological command written years before anyone imagined she would walk away. Maul enters the larger picture indirectly. His Shadow Collective operations continue, and Sidious still regards him as a dangerous former apprentice who knows too much. In canon, Maul eventually recognizes that Anakin is central to Sidious's endgame. In this timeline, news of Anakin's death reaches Maul long before the Siege of Mandalore. His reaction is fascination. Whatever future Sidious intended for Skywalker is gone. Maul does not suddenly become an ally of the Jedi. He continues ruling through fear, crime, and violence. But he understands opportunity. If Sidious's plan is destabilized, Maul can expand his own influence while Master and Apprentice scramble to contain the damage. The Shadow Collective pressures supply routes already strained by clone medical rotations. Pike networks exploit shortages. Black Sun brokers weapons to worlds nervous about both Republic and Separatist control. The criminal underworld therefore becomes a fourth pressure on the Republic's already unstable war effort. Sidious would normally prefer to deal with Maul personally, but the chip crisis consumes his attention. Dooku is ordered to contain the Shadow Collective through proxies. Savage Opress and Maul remain dangerous variables longer than they otherwise might have if Sidious had the freedom to focus on them. Ventress also becomes useful to investigators. She knows Dooku's habits, residences, secure routes, and relationships. By this stage, she has been discarded by him, and has no loyalty to the Separatist cause. Ahsoka, who has already encountered Ventress under complicated circumstances, becomes the most plausible person to approach her. Ventress refuses to help the Jedi out of principle, but she is willing to sell information that harms Dooku. Her information helps confirm which Sereno accounts and safe houses genuinely belong to Tyrannus. She also tells Ahsoka something more important. Dooku was terrified of disappointing his master in a way that never fit the public image of the confident Separatist leader. There is always someone above him. The Jedi already know a Darth Sidious exists, but hearing how carefully Dooku structures his entire life around that unseen superior reinforces the conclusion that the true Sith Lord possesses extraordinary political power. Meanwhile, Anakin's absence reshapes Padme personally. There is no pregnancy at this point that needs to be hidden. The canonical pregnancy occurs later, near the end of the war. With Anakin dead months earlier, Luke and Leia are never conceived in the normal timeline. That future consequence is enormous, but Padme cannot know it. What she knows is that the Republic took the man she loved into a war. The hidden architecture of that war placed a weapon inside one of his soldiers, and the government now seems more interested in preserving stability than explaining why. Her grief makes her bolder. In canon, Padme already opposed the expansion of military spending and Palpatine's accumulation of emergency power. Here, she has a direct reason to turn those concerns into a sustained campaign. She and Bail begin organizing senators around a demand that all wartime emergency authorities automatically expire once the chip investigation and peace process reach defined milestones. Palpatine sees the beginning of the political coalition that could eventually become the seeds of open resistance, forming before his empire exists. Mon Mothma argues for negotiations with moderate separatists. Dooku's exposure as Tyrannus complicates that possibility because it proves the Confederacy has been led by a Sith conspirator. At the same time, it gives ordinary separatist senators reason to believe they too were manipulated. Some worlds that joined the CIS because of genuine grievances begin considering a settlement that removes both Dooku and Palpatine's emergency structure from the equation. Sidious cannot allow peace. The war is the mechanism through which he centralized authority, militarized the Republic, discredited the Jedi, and normalized extraordinary executive power. If negotiations begin while the chip conspiracy is under investigation, The entire political architecture of the Grand Plan may collapse before he can transform it. He orders Grievous to commit atrocities designed to make compromise impossible. Civilian targets are struck, prisoners are executed, Republic worlds are attacked in ways guaranteed to inflame public anger. The Separatist Parliament is bypassed by military command. Sidious wants the Republic to believe there is no one across the table worth negotiating with. That strategy creates tension between Dooku and his own civilian government. Dooku has always manipulated the Separatist cause, but now he has to do so more openly because the timetable is breaking. Senators on Raxus question why Grievous is escalating just as secret talks become possible. Corporate leaders worry that endless war is destroying the markets they intended to control. The Confederacy becomes less stable at precisely the moment Palpatine needs it to function as a coherent enemy. The loss of Anakin also changes the Battle of Coruscant before it ever occurs. Sidious can no longer design a scenario in which Dooku captures the Chancellor, Anakin defeats him, and Palpatine orders the young Jedi to execute an unarmed prisoner. There is no intended Darth Vader to push across that moral line. If Coruscant is attacked at all, the strategic purpose must be different. Sidious considers using the battle to kill several senior Jedi at once. Grievous could strike the capital, while Dooku targets Mace Windu, Obi-Wan, or Yoda. The Chancellor could still arrange to be placed in apparent danger and emerge with expanded authority. But every version is riskier without Anakin. Dooku is too valuable to sacrifice casually, and Obi-Wan is now deeply suspicious of the Chancellor. The Jedi Council understands that the endgame is approaching even if they do not know its exact shape. Yoda begins spending more time away from the Central War effort investigating the Force and the Sith. Mace focuses on the political threat. Obi-Wan coordinates the clone removal program and Sifo-Dyas inquiry. Plo Koon works with clone officers. Shaak Ti remains on Kamino, where she has effectively taken control of a medical system the Kaminoans no longer fully trust her to access. Lama Su finally confronts Shaak Ti. He argues that the Jedi are destroying the product Kamino was contracted to deliver. The clones were engineered to follow commands. Altering them without authorization violates the agreement that created the army. Shaak Ti responds that no contract can legitimize hidden programming designed by the enemy to compel murder. The exchange marks the end of the fiction that Kamino and the Jedi are partners with aligned interests. Nala Se is detained for formal questioning. She initially claims the chips are defensive safeguards against rogue Jedi. This explanation mirrors the false story used in canon. Sifo-Dyas supposedly feared that Jedi might turn against the Republic and wanted the clones capable of responding. The Council asks why Tyrannus, now identified as Count Dooku, supervised such a safeguard. Nala Se has no answer that survives scrutiny. Under pressure, she admits more than she intended. The behavioral protocols were not designed by ordinary Kaminoan military planners. They were specified through Tyrannus and supported by authority that the Kaminoans believed came from the highest levels of the project. She may not know Palpatine is Sidious, but she knows communications tied to Tyrannus were treated as legitimate, even when they contradicted Jedi expectations. That admission places Dooku directly inside the clone command architecture. Fives asks whether there is a specific order targeting Jedi. Nala Se refuses to answer. Her refusal becomes the answer. The Council authorizes more aggressive analysis. A removed chip is stimulated in a controlled laboratory environment while isolated from a living brain. Researchers identify response clusters associated with contingency commands. The exact language remains inaccessible until they reconstruct transmission patterns from Kaminoan control systems, but the existence of multiple hidden protocols is confirmed. One cluster produces the same neural override signature observed in Tup when he killed Anakin. Rex names it what everyone is thinking, an execution order. The Council does not yet know the number 66, but the conspiracy is now functionally exposed. The Sith built the clone army. The clones contain hidden command implants. One implant malfunction caused a clone to kill a Jedi. The program includes a dedicated override matching that behavior. Waiting for perfect certainty would be suicidal. This is when Mace Windu argues that the Jedi must confront the Chancellor. Yoda does not immediately agree. The evidence proves Dooku's role, not Palpatine's Sith identity. Arresting the elected Supreme Chancellor without incontrovertible evidence could fracture the Republic and hand Sidious exactly the chaos he wants. Obi-Wan proposes a narrower step: inform a trusted Senate committee, secure the temple and clone command network, then compel Palpatine to surrender executive records under lawful authority. Padme, Bail, and Mon Mothma are brought into the discussion because the Jedi cannot solve a constitutional crisis alone. Padme is stunned when they reveal the full implication of the chip program. She has spent months suspecting corruption. She did not imagine that the army itself may have been designed to execute the Jedi. She asks the question Anakin would have asked first. Why would Palpatine need the Jedi dead? Mace answers that a Sith Lord controlling the Republic could not tolerate the Order once the war ended. The Jedi are the only institution with the training and numbers to challenge Sith rule. If the war has been designed to weaken the Order and spread its members across thousands of fronts, then a simultaneous clone attack would finish the process. Padme sees the political half instantly. With the Jedi destroyed and the Separatists defeated, Palpatine could claim that traitorous generals forced him to reorganize the Republic for security. Emergency powers would become permanent. Anyone opposing the new government could be linked to the Jedi conspiracy. The room goes silent because they have just described the Empire before it exists. At that point, the question stops being whether Palpatine is suspicious. It becomes how to move before he realizes they understand the shape of the plan. They do not know that he already does. Sidious does not need a spy inside the council chamber to know the Jedi are closing in. He feels the change in their behavior, sees the sudden restrictions around clone communications, and receives reports that executive records are being quietly preserved rather than routinely destroyed. Mas Amedda tells him that Bail Organa has cancelled several meetings without explanation. Sly Moore reports unusual traffic between Padme Amidala's office and the Jedi Temple. Dooku warns that Sereno-linked assets have been seized. The window is closing. Palpatine has two choices. He can trigger the purge immediately and hope enough chips remain active, or he can try to sever the investigation's political legitimacy before the Jedi move. He attempts both. Publicly, the Chancellor announces that the clone neurological crisis has been contained. He praises the sacrifices of General Skywalker and the soldiers who exposed the defect, then states that independent medical reviews have found no evidence of a broader threat to civilian security. The statement is deliberately misleading. It never says the chips are harmless. It says ordinary citizens are safe. The objective is to reassure the public while making continued Jedi secrecy look paranoid. At the same time, Palpatine orders the Judicial Department to demand access to all evidence seized from Kamino and Sereno. He claims the Republic needs a unified criminal investigation into Dooku's interference with military procurement. If the Jedi surrender the evidence, Sidious can alter or bury parts of it. If they refuse, he can accuse them of obstructing civilian government. Padme blocks the transfer through the Senate committee, arguing that evidence connected to Anakin's murder cannot be placed under the exclusive control of the executive branch being investigated. The vote is closer than she wants, but the measure passes. Palpatine smiles publicly and accepts the decision. Privately, he decides the Senate has become unreliable. The Jedi accelerate temple defenses without openly mobilizing. Clone units assigned to Coruscant security are screened first. This is a major difference from canon. The 501st, which would have marched into the temple under Darth Vader during Operation Nightfall, no longer has Anakin to command it, and has spent months living with the fact that one of its brothers killed him because of hidden programming. Rex makes certain that as many 501st officers as possible undergo removal. The Legion that Sidious intended to use as the spear point of the massacre becomes one of the units least likely to obey him. Commander Fox and the Coruscant Guard present a harder problem. Their command structure is closely tied to the Chancellor's office, and rotating them through Jedi-controlled medical facilities would immediately alert Palpatine. The Council therefore cannot neutralize every Guard unit. This creates a dangerous split on Coruscant. Some clone formations are free, while others still carry intact chips and receive orders through executive channels. Fives insists that Fox be warned. Their relationship has never been warm, but Fives understands that the Guard are brothers too. Rex agrees. A discreet attempt is made to convince Fox to submit to a scan. Fox initially sees the request as an insult to his duty and suspects Rex is allowing grief over Anakin to cloud his judgment. When Rex shows him a recording of Tup's neural activity and the extracted chip, Fox's certainty begins to crack. Whether Fox personally undergoes removal before the crisis is one of the timeline's closest calls. In the most coherent version, he does. Fox is rigid, but he is not mindless. Evidence that a hidden device can compel a clone to murder a Jedi is precisely the kind of security threat he is trained to take seriously. He agrees on the condition that the procedure remain classified. That single decision later saves lives inside the Senate district. Palpatine loses another piece without knowing it. Dooku, meanwhile, receives instructions to prepare a strike on Coruscant. This would resemble the eventual Battle of Coruscant in scale, but not purpose. There is no plan for Anakin to kill Dooku. Instead, Sidious intends to use the attack to scatter Jedi leadership, create panic, and justify a declaration of emergency so sweeping that legal opposition becomes irrelevant. Grievous is ordered to penetrate the core. Dooku is told to remain ready to extract Palpatine if necessary, though both Sith understand that the rescue would really be a controlled relocation. Dooku begins questioning whether following those orders is still rational. If Sidious is exposed, Dooku becomes the most obvious surviving Sith. If Sidious survives, Dooku may still be blamed for the clone conspiracy and discarded once the crisis passes. The death of Anakin has made Dooku more necessary, but also more visible. He starts considering the possibility that his best future lies not in saving Sidious, but in allowing the Republic and Jedi to wound his master before he steps in. That calculation introduces unpredictability into a war Sidious once controlled completely. The Council's next breakthrough comes from communications analysis. Removed chips respond to a family of command signatures embedded inside Republic military architecture. The signals are not ordinary tactical orders. They are privileged contingencies, capable of bypassing normal authentication layers. Access traces lead into systems maintained under the Chancellor's Emergency Defense Authority. This still does not produce a message reading Execute Order 66, because Sidious has hidden the operational phrase behind protected command architecture, but it proves the Chancellor's office possesses a channel capable of activating the same kind of override that killed Anakin. Mace Windu no longer considers delay acceptable. He gathers Yoda, Obi-Wan, Plo Koon, Kit Fisto, Sae-Seatin, Aegon Kolar, and several other senior masters in a secure chamber. Their debate is not about whether the Sith conspiracy exists. That is settled. The debate is about whether Palpatine is personally Sidious or whether Sidious controls him. Yoda argues that either possibility requires removing the Chancellor from unrestricted command of the clone network immediately. Padme and Bail work in parallel to create a lawful mechanism. A Senate emergency resolution is drafted suspending the Chancellor's unilateral military command authority, pending investigation into the clone conspiracy. They know Palpatine's allies may block it if given time, so the vote is scheduled with minimal notice. Mon Mothma begins contacting undecided senators personally. Sidious learns of the planned vote hours before it begins. He decides the grand plan cannot be saved in its original form. The order is transmitted. Across the galaxy, clone command systems receive a priority contingency from the Supreme Chancellor. For troopers whose chips remain active, the words trigger exactly what they were designed to trigger. Loyalty disappears beneath programming. Jedi become traitors. Weapons rise. But the effect is no longer uniform. On one front, a Jedi general turns to address his commander and sees confusion rather than obedience. The commander has had his chip removed. Half of his battalion has not. He orders the men to stand down. Some obey because the normal chain of command still matters for a fraction of a second. Others raise rifles at both the Jedi and their own officer. The battlefield erupts into a civil war inside the unit. On another world, a commander with an intact chip shoots his Jedi before anyone understands what is happening. Months of investigation cannot save everyone. The Grand Army is simply too large. Thousands of soldiers remain programmed, and many Jedi are still dispersed in vulnerable positions. The purge begins, but it begins unevenly. Plo Koon is not flying alone with an unmodified escort in this timeline. Wolf has been cleared and has warned his pilots about the possibility of a command override. When the signal reaches parts of the formation, loyal clone officers disrupt targeting systems and force affected pilots to break away. PLO survives the initial attack. Obi-Wan is on Coruscant rather than Utapau because the Council has prioritized the political crisis over the final hunt for Grievous. Cody is also on the Capitol as part of the reorganized command structure and has no chip. He receives the order, reads the wording, and immediately realizes what it is. The contingency Rex feared has arrived. Rex is stationed with much of the 501st near Coruscant. His helmet fills with command traffic identifying Jedi leadership as enemies of the Republic. Nothing inside his mind changes. He feels only horror. Around him, some troopers freeze as their chips activate. Others have been cleared. Rex shouts for non-lethal containment protocols and orders communications jammed inside the Legion. Fives is beside him. For Fives, the moment is vindication and nightmare at once. He was right. The chips were built to turn them against the Jedi. He does not have time to celebrate being believed. He starts helping Rex isolate affected squads before they can receive secondary targets. The 501st fractures, but it does not march on the temple. That difference alone transforms the Purge on Coruscant. In canon, Darth Vader led elite clone troops into a temple, whose defenders did not understand what was happening until the attack was already inside their home. Here, there is no Vader. There is no Anakin at all. The temple has been warned for months that the clone network may contain an anti-Jedi contingency. Defensive barriers are active. Younglings are moved toward protected evacuation routes the moment the emergency signal appears. Palpatine therefore orders the Coruscant Guard and other still-programmed formations to assault the temple directly. They face Jedi who are prepared, clone officers who are fighting beside those Jedi, and security systems that have not been disabled from within. The assault is brutal, but it is not a massacre in the same way. Fox receives the Chancellor's command and feels nothing except disbelief. His chip is gone. He listens as subordinate guards begin identifying Jedi as traitors. He immediately understands that his own unit has been compromised. Instead of leading the hunt, Fox orders the Senate district sealed and begins arresting officers who attempt to carry out the execution order. Palpatine is furious when the guard does not respond uniformly. He realizes the removals reach deeper than his intelligence reported. The Jedi Council is together when the order activates, another catastrophic difference for Sidious. In canon, Yoda is on Kashyyyk, Obi-Wan is on Utapau, and much of the Council is scattered. Here, the chip crisis has concentrated senior leadership on Coruscant. Mace Windu looks at Yoda and says there is no longer any uncertainty about the intention behind the army. They move for Palpatine immediately. The arrest team is larger than the one that confronted him in Revenge of the Sith. Mace still leads because the Chancellor is physically on Coruscant, and Windu has argued most strongly for decisive action. Yoda accompanies him, rather than being light years away. Obi-Wan refuses to remain behind. Kit Fisto joins them, Saesee Tiin and Aegon Kohler come as well. Plo Koon is not yet able to reach Coruscant, but other masters secure the temple. Padme is ordered into a protected Senate bunker with Bail and Mon Mothma. She hates being removed from the confrontation, but Obi-Wan tells her that if they fail, someone must preserve the evidence and expose what happened. For the first time since Anakin died, she understands that his death has placed her directly inside the struggle he never lived to see. Sidious knows they are coming. He stands in the Chancellor's office without pretending confusion when the doors open. There is no Anakin behind Mace whom he can tempt with promises about saving Padme. There is no emotionally compromised Jedi Knight whose fear can turn the confrontation at the final second. There is only a group of masters who know that the Chancellor just activated a hidden command inside the clone army and ordered their deaths. Mace tells Palpatine he is under arrest for treason, conspiracy with Count Dooku, unlawful manipulation of the Grand Army, and the attempted extermination of the Jedi Order. Palpatine smiles. The lightsaber leaves his sleeve. Sidious attacks because politics has ended. His first movement is still terrifyingly fast. Aegon Kohler and Saesee Tiin barely survive the opening exchange because they know a Sith Lord is standing in front of them and are not caught by the same level of shock as in canon. Kit Fisto meets the assault from one side. Obi-Wan anchors the defense. Mace drives forward with Vapad. Yoda enters the duel as the only Jedi present who can match Sidious's speed without being overwhelmed immediately. This is not a fair fight for Palpatine. He is extraordinarily powerful. He has defeated multiple Jedi Masters in seconds and later fought Yoda to a near standstill. But Yoda and Mace together are a combination Sidious never chose to face directly in canon. Add Obi-Wan's defensive mastery and several other council members, and the duel becomes a battle for escape rather than dominance. Sidious tries to separate them with the Force. The office explodes around them. Furniture, transparent steel, and pieces of the walls become weapons. Lightning floods the chamber, Mace absorbs and redirects. Yoda catches another blast. Obi-Wan is thrown across the room hard enough to crack a pillar, but returns to the fight. Palpatine reaches for the clone network again, ordering loyal guard units to converge on his position. Fox intercepts the command. Free clone officers lock down access corridors. Programmed guards fight them in the halls. The Chancellor's office becomes the center of a battle inside the Republic's own security apparatus. Dooku receives an emergency signal from his master. Attack Coruscant now. He hesitates. That hesitation may be the final reason Sidious loses. Dooku has always been proud enough to imagine himself capable of inheriting the Sith legacy. If Palpatine survives, Dooku remains his subordinate. If Palpatine dies, Darth Tyrannus becomes the senior Sith Lord in the galaxy. The Jedi are concentrated on Coruscant and may be weakened by the duel. Why risk the Separatist fleet saving a master who has just lost control of his own army? Dooku orders Grievous to continue the planned offensive but delays his own arrival. He tells himself he is waiting for confirmation. In reality, he is waiting to see who wins. Sidious realizes no rescue is coming quickly enough. He changes objectives and attempts to flee through the Senate complex. Yoda blocks the route. Mace presses him from behind. Their blades force Sidious into a narrower corridor where his speed is less useful. He unleashes lightning powerful enough to drive everyone back except Yoda, who catches it with both hands and forces the energy upward into the ceiling. Obi-Wan sees the opening and attacks not with rage, but with the controlled precision Anakin spent years teasing him for. Sidious twists away, but Mace's blade cuts across his shoulder. For the first time, the Sith Lord is visibly wounded. He tries one last manipulation. He tells them the Republic will collapse without him. He says Dooku's fleets are already moving, and millions of clones are killing Jedi because the Council's own failures allowed the army to exist. He accuses them of staging the coup he always intended to claim they attempted. Mace answers that the evidence will decide what the Republic believes. Sidious attacks again. The duel ends when Yoda breaks his balance with the Force and Mace disarms him. Unlike the confrontation in canon, there is no Anakin arriving at the last moment to cut off Mace's hand. There is no promise of secret knowledge capable of saving Padme, because Padme is not pregnant and Anakin is dead. There is no emotional wedge left in the room. Palpatine reaches for lightning from the floor. Yoda contains the first surge. Mace steps through it and strikes. Darth Sidious dies in the office from which he intended to rule an empire. The war does not end the moment his body falls. Across the galaxy, Order 66 is still active in countless clone units. Programmed soldiers continue attacking Jedi until communication networks can be severed or chips removed. Some Jedi die after Sidious because their killers never receive a cancellation. Others are rescued by free clone commanders. The Council issues an emergency broadcast ordering all Republic forces to disable the contingency signal and place any trooper displaying involuntary anti-Jedi behavior under medical restraint. Rex and Fives become the most important soldiers in the Grand Army for the next several hours. Their units broadcast extraction procedures and neural countermeasures to every command node they can reach. Kix works with medical teams to distribute protocols. Cody coordinates with fleet officers. Fox secures the Senate. Clone troopers are fighting to save other clones from the command buried inside them. The temple survives. There are casualties. Some guard formations breach outer levels before being stopped. Jedi defenders die protecting evacuation corridors. Younglings experience the terror of hearing clone blaster fire inside a building that was supposed to be their safest home. But there is no Darth Vader moving through the temple with intimate knowledge of its defenses. There is no 501st acting as a unified execution force. Thousands who died in canon survive. Shaak Ti survives because the temple is not overrun in the same manner. Sindralig and temple security organize defensive lines. Jedi who would have been isolated during the Purge reach Coruscant through protected channels and learn which clone units can be trusted. The Order is wounded, but it is not annihilated. The Senate convenes under emergency protection, while evidence from Palpatine's office is secured. This is the moment Sidious feared most. Once he is dead, secrecy loses its most powerful defender. Hidden compartments, encrypted Sith communications, executive command logs, and records of contacts with Dooku begin to surface. Not every secret is easy to decode, but enough is found to transform suspicion into proof. Palpatine was Darth Sidious. The revelation shocks the galaxy more deeply than the death of any political leader in recent memory. The Supreme Chancellor who led the Republic through the Clone Wars was simultaneously the Sith Master directing Count Dooku. The war was not simply exploited by corruption. Its highest political leaders on both sides were connected. Padme stands before the Senate and presents the evidence with a composure that conceals how personal the moment is. She does not reveal her marriage to Anakin. She does not need to. She states that General Skywalker's death exposed the mechanism through which Sidious intended to murder the Jedi and overthrow constitutional government. Tup, a clone who had no control over the command inside him, became the first victim and the first warning. Bail demands the immediate suspension of all emergency powers granted specifically to Palpatine. Mon Mothma calls for an interim executive council subject to Senate oversight until new elections can be held. Masameda attempts to preserve continuity by arguing that the government cannot dismantle itself during a separatist offensive. His own proximity to Palpatine makes him politically toxic, and he is detained pending investigation. The Republic survives the night, but barely. Then Dooku makes his move. Count Dooku has spent his adult life believing that the Republic is decayed beyond repair. Long before becoming Darth Tyrannus, he was a Jedi who lost faith in the Senate's ability to serve the galaxy. Sidious transformed that disillusionment into Sith ambition, and gave him a role in a plan that promised a new order. Now Sidious is dead, the plan is exposed, and Dooku faces a choice he never expected to receive. Submit to a Republic that knows exactly what he is, or claim the shattered conspiracy for himself. He chooses himself. Dooku declares Palpatine's death proof that the Republic has fallen under Jedi dictatorship. The statement is almost absurd, given the evidence coming from Coruscant, but propaganda does not need to be internally consistent to be useful. He tells separatist worlds that the Jedi murdered the Chancellor and now intend to impose direct military rule. He omits the fact that he served Palpatine as Darth Tyrannus. When intercepted records linking the two Sith are broadcast, Dooku calls them fabrications. Grievous is ordered to continue the offensive. The Separatist military now operates without Sidious balancing its strategic objectives against the Republic's. Dooku has no reason to preserve Palpatine's political timetable. He wants either victory or enough territory to build a state he controls personally. The final phase of the Clone Wars therefore becomes more dangerous in the short term, even though the Sith conspiracy has been exposed. The Republic is simultaneously purging its clone command network of Order 66, reorganizing civilian leadership, and defending against a separatist surge. If the Jedi had truly become complacent after Sidious's death, Dooku might exploit the chaos successfully. Instead, the attempted purge convinces them that the war has to end without simply returning to the old pattern of Jedi generals and clone armies. Mace Windu argues that Dooku must be captured because he is now the surviving witness who can explain the Sith side of the conspiracy. Yoda agrees, but warns that vengeance cannot determine the mission. Obi-Wan feels the absence of Anakin acutely. In another timeline, the war ends with Anakin decapitating Dooku while Palpatine watches. Here, Obi-Wan has to pursue Dooku knowing that his former Padawan was supposed to be part of whatever Sith design Dooku served. Ahsoka asks to join the hunt. She is not a Jedi and has no formal military rank, but the Council's relationship with her has changed since Anakin's death. The Order has already been forced to confront how badly it failed her during the Temple bombing crisis, and she has spent months helping Rex and Fives expose the clone conspiracy. Obi-Wan does not try to command her back into the Order. He asks whether she is certain. Ahsoka says Dooku helped build the system that killed Anakin and tried to turn every clone into a murderer. She wants to see it ended. Padme opposes any operation whose only objective is execution. Her position is not mercy for Dooku, it is strategy. If he can be captured alive, his testimony can help dismantle the networks that made the war possible. Banking arrangements, corporate alliances, secret military contracts, and Sith agents remain scattered throughout the Republic and Confederacy. Killing Dooku may satisfy the battlefield. Interrogating him may prevent another version of the conspiracy from surviving. Rex agrees for a more personal reason. Tup died because of something Tyrannus helped place in his head. Millions of clones deserve to hear Dooku admit what was done to them. The campaign to reach Dooku becomes the final major Republic offensive of the war. but it does not look like the Outer Rim sieges of canon. Clone units are no longer treated as interchangeable formations. Cleared officers are placed in command positions wherever possible. Unscreened troops are removed from Jedi proximity until their chips can be disabled. Planetary defense forces begin taking a larger role because the Republic cannot depend on the Grand Army, while half its soldiers are undergoing medical intervention. The transition creates chaos, but also begins the military reform that will define the post-war Republic. Worlds that surrendered defense authority to Coruscant during the crisis are asked to reactivate local forces. Judicial and sector fleets assume convoy duties. Volunteers enlist in temporary Republic formations that fight beside clones rather than replacing them immediately. The military becomes less centralized even before the war officially ends. Dooku retreats toward Sereno, where his political legitimacy is strongest and his personal resources are greatest. He turns his homeworld into a fortress. Grievous wants to keep attacking, but Dooku understands that a mobile terror campaign cannot preserve the Sith legacy if Coruscant stabilizes. He needs a capital, loyal fleets, and time. Separatist unity begins to crack around him. The civilian parliament on Raxus has spent years being manipulated by Dooku while believing itself to represent world seeking independence from Republic corruption. Proof that Dooku secretly served the Republic Chancellor as a Sith apprentice is devastating. Moderate senators demand his resignation. Corporate members of the Separatist Council are less concerned with morality than survival. Newt Gunray wants guarantees. Wat Tambor wants his assets protected. Sandhill wants to know which government will honor banking clan obligations if the Confederacy collapses. Dooku responds with intimidation because the political sophistication that once made him an effective leader has been stripped of its central deception. He can no longer present himself credibly as the dignified alternative to Palpatine. He is exposed as part of the same conspiracy. Worlds begin defecting or declaring neutrality. The Republic Senate takes advantage. Padme, Bail, and Mon Mothma support direct negotiations with separatist systems willing to disavow Dooku and Grievous. The terms are intentionally different from unconditional surrender. Worlds can retain local autonomy, receive representation in reconstruction talks, and submit grievances about taxation and corporate exploitation to a constitutional convention. This is the kind of political settlement Padme argued for before the war hardened everyone's positions. Some senators accuse her of rewarding rebellion. She responds that the entire war was manipulated by two Sith Lords. Treating every citizen of a separatist world as personally responsible for Dooku's conspiracy would continue Sidious's work for him. The policy works. Each world that leaves the Confederacy reduces the territory Grievous can use and the resources Dooku can command. Corporate leaders begin negotiating immunity deals in exchange for records. The banking clan becomes especially vulnerable because investigators already possess financial evidence connected to the clone conspiracy. Sandhill's allies start turning on one another. Grievous reacts with fury. He sees political defections as cowardice and begins attacking separatist worlds considering peace. That decision destroys what remains of his legitimacy outside the droid military. Republic intelligence distributes footage of separatist armies threatening their own member systems. The war's narrative shifts. The Republic is no longer fighting a unified secession. It is helping former separatist worlds escape Dooku and Grievous. The Jedi deliberately reduced their visibility in this campaign. The attempted Order 66 purge has forced them to recognize how thoroughly they became identified with military command. Rather than leading every offensive personally, Masters serve as strategic advisors, negotiators, and specialists. Clone and planetary officers command many conventional operations. This protects Jedi from another hidden contingency and begins returning them toward the peacekeeping role they abandoned under wartime pressure. Obi-Wan still goes to Sereno because Dooku is a Sith Lord and capturing him requires Jedi. Yoda remains on Coruscant to stabilize the Order and investigate surviving Sith networks. Mace oversees security around the interim government. Plo Koon coordinates with defecting separatist systems. Ahsoka travels with Obi-Wan by choice rather than rank. Rex and Fives accompany the operation with a cleared 501st Detachment. Cody brings elements of the 212th. For the first time since Anakin died, the two formations fight together under a command structure that does not depend on a single charismatic Jedi general. Rex has become more independent because he had to. Cody has taken on responsibilities normally left to Jedi. The clones are already becoming the officers the Republic once denied them the chance to be. The siege of Sereno is difficult, but shorter than Dooku expects. His droid army is formidable, yet the political defections have disrupted supply. Local nobles who once tolerated his rule begin feeding information to Republic intelligence. Dooku retreats to his estate as defensive lines collapse. Obi-Wan confronts him in the same halls where Dooku once cultivated the image of an aristocratic statesman. Ahsoka stands beside him. Dooku smiles when he sees her and comments on the irony that Skywalker's abandoned apprentice has come to avenge him. The remark is designed to provoke. Ahsoka does not take the bait. Obi-Wan asks Dooku to surrender and testify. Dooku laughs. He tells Obi-Wan that the Republic will merely build another Palpatine, because its institutions reward fear and corruption. He says the Jedi learned nothing until a clone killed their precious chosen one. There is truth inside the cruelty, which is why Obi-Wan does not dismiss it completely. The Jedi did ignore warning signs. They did accept the clone army without understanding it. They did allow war to define them. But Dooku uses those failures to excuse his own choices. Obi-Wan tells him that recognizing corruption does not justify helping a Sith Lord engineer a galactic war. The duel begins. Dooku remains one of the greatest duelists alive. Anakin is not there to overpower him through raw strength. Obi-Wan's defensive style has struggled against Dooku before, and Ahsoka is talented but younger. The fight therefore cannot simply recreate the invisible hand with different participants. Dooku initially controls the engagement, using precise blade work and force attacks to separate them. Rex and Fives are fighting through droid defenders elsewhere in the estate. They hear the duel over comms, but cannot intervene without risking blaster fire around lightsabers. Cody secures the outer corridors and cuts off escape routes. Ahsoka becomes the unpredictable factor. Dooku knows Obi-Wan's style intimately from repeated battles. He knows how Jedi Masters tend to respond. Ahsoka has spent time outside the Order and no longer fights as though a council examiner is watching. She uses the environment, changes elevation, and forces Dooku to divide attention in ways he cannot control as easily. Obi-Wan does not try to beat Dooku through aggression. He survives. That has always been his greatest skill. Each time Dooku presses, Obi-Wan gives ground without collapsing. Ahsoka strikes when Dooku overextends. The duel becomes less about dominance and more about exhausting a man who has spent years believing elegance will always control chaos. Dooku finally tries to escape, rather than risk capture. Cody's troops seal the landing platform. Rex arrives from another corridor. For one instant, the former Count of Sereno stands surrounded not just by Jedi, but by clones whose minds he helped enslave. Fives raises his blaster and asks him why. Dooku could lie. Instead, pride wins. He tells Fives that the clone army was always a means to an end. The Republic needed soldiers willing to obey, and the Sith needed the Jedi to trust those soldiers until the proper moment. Individual clones were never part of the calculation. Rex's expression hardens, but he does not fire. That restraint matters. If the clones kill Dooku in anger, they allow him to define them one last time as weapons responding to command and emotion. Rex orders him taken alive. Dooku attacks anyway. He knows capture means humiliation and interrogation. He launches Force Lightning toward Fives. Obi-Wan intercepts the attack. Ahsoka closes from the flank. Rex and Cody fire stun rounds rather than lethal bolts, forcing Dooku to split attention. The combination finally creates an opening. Obi-Wan disarms him. Ahsoka's blade stops at his throat. Dooku waits for the execution Palpatine once intended Anakin to perform. It never comes. Ahsoka deactivates her saber. Count Dooku is arrested. The symbolism is enormous. The Clone Wars do not end with Anakin murdering a helpless Sith at Sidious's command. They end with the surviving victims of the conspiracy refusing to repeat its logic. Grievous remains at large, which means military operations continue for a time. But without Sidious or Dooku directing the Confederacy, Grievous has no political system capable of sustaining a galactic state. He becomes what he always was beneath the title, a warlord with a massive droid army. Former separatist worlds increasingly cooperate with the Republic to eliminate him because he is now attacking anyone who attempts peace. The hunt for Grievous eventually leads to a battle much like Utapau in purpose if not exact circumstance. Obi-Wan may still be the Jedi best suited to face him, but by this point, the Council is reluctant to resume old habits. A joint task force isolates Grievous's remaining command network. Local resistance fighters provide intelligence. Clone and planetary forces assault droid positions, while Obi-Wan confronts the cyborg general directly. Grievous dies, whether by Obi-Wan's hand or in the collapse of his final command, and the organized separatist war effectively ends. The peace that follows is nothing like the victory Sidious planned. There is no declaration of a galactic empire. There is no Senate chamber cheering the end of liberty, because the Jedi have been framed as traitors. There is no Darth Vader standing beside an emperor. There is no purge reducing the Jedi to scattered fugitives. Instead, the Republic emerges from the war horrified by how close it came to becoming exactly that system. The first political question is what to do with the clone army. Millions of men still exist, whose bodies age rapidly, and whose lives have been defined almost entirely by military service. The easy response would be to disband them and send them away, but Padme argues that doing so would repeat the same moral failure in another form. The clones did not create the war, they were created for it. They deserve citizenship, compensation, medical care, and the freedom to decide whether they want to remain soldiers. The Senate passes a Clone Emancipation Act after bitter debate. The legal language formally recognizes clones as citizens rather than military property. Kaminoan contracts granting ownership or control over their bodies are voided. Every remaining inhibitor chip is removed at Republic expense. Clones are entitled to housing, education, healthcare, and pensions adjusted for accelerated aging. Some senators resist because the cost is enormous. Padme answers that the Republic was willing to spend almost unlimited money creating soldiers when it needed them. Claiming poverty when those soldiers need lives after war would expose the Republic's values as fraudulent. Rex becomes one of the most visible advocates for the legislation. He dislikes politics, but understands that battlefield freedom means little without legal freedom. Fives speaks before the Senate and describes discovering the device inside his own brain. He explains that loyalty cannot be manufactured through a switch. If the Republic wants soldiers in the future, it should recruit people who choose to defend it. That principle becomes the foundation of military reconstruction. The centralized clone army is gradually phased out, not because clones are considered untrustworthy, but because the Republic no longer wants its entire security structure dependent on one engineered population or one executive command network. Clones who choose to remain in service are offered commissions and positions in a new federal defense force. Others retire. Planetary militaries and sector defense fleets regain responsibilities they surrendered during the war. This decentralization makes an Imperial stormtrooper system far harder to build later. Palpatine's model depended on concentrating military authority in Coruscant and normalizing a galaxy-wide army loyal to the central government. The post-war Republic deliberately moves the other direction. No chancellor can activate one command and instantly control every major military formation. Kamino faces severe consequences. Lama Su and senior officials are investigated for their role in concealing the chips. The Republic does not destroy Kamino or treat every scientist as a criminal, because many personnel worked within a system whose full purpose they did not understand. But the cloning contract is terminated. Military facilities are placed under international oversight, and the practice of engineering sentient beings for compulsory service is prohibited. Nala Se's fate is more complicated. Her medical knowledge is essential for safely removing chips and treating clone aging, yet she also helped preserve the conspiracy. She is offered reduced punishment in exchange for complete cooperation. Rex despises the arrangement but accepts that saving his brothers matters more than satisfying anger. Dooku's trial becomes the largest criminal proceeding in Republic history. The charges include treason, conspiracy, murder, unlawful warfare, manipulation of the clone project, and participation in a Sith plot to overthrow constitutional government. His aristocratic status means nothing. Sereno is allowed to send observers, as are former separatist systems, because the trial has to demonstrate that this is not Republic revenge against secessionists. It is accountability for a leader who betrayed both sides. Dooku testifies because the evidence against him is overwhelming, and because pride still makes him want history to understand how much he knew. He describes Sidious's role in shaping the war. He confirms that Palpatine intended the Jedi to die through the clone contingency. He admits that Anakin Skywalker was of special interest to Sidious, though he may never have known every detail of how his master intended to turn Anakin. Obi-Wan listens to that testimony with a grief different from the one he felt after Ringo Vinda. He finally understands that Anakin's death did more than rob Sidious of a powerful apprentice. It removed the emotional center of the Sith endgame. Palpatine had built a trap around Anakin's fear, anger, loyalty, and relationships. Tup's malfunction destroyed the trap before it could close. Padme hears the same testimony and realizes how close Anakin came to being targeted by the man he trusted most. Palpatine had spent years presenting himself as Anakin's friend, while planning to use him against the Jedi. Padme's grief acquires a strange second layer. She lost her husband, but she also lost him before Sidious could transform him into someone capable of destroying everything Anakin loved. She never thinks that makes the death good. Nothing makes it good. Anakin did not need to die to avoid becoming Vader. There were other possible choices, other people who might have reached him, other ways the conspiracy could have failed. But in this timeline, the random tragedy on Ringo Vinda removes the exact pressure point Sidious intended to exploit, and gives everyone else time to see the machinery behind it. Ahsoka struggles with that idea too. She wonders whether she could have helped Anakin if he had lived, whether leaving the Order made him more isolated, and whether the prophecy meant something they all misunderstood. Yoda eventually tells her that prophecy is not a promise that events will unfold without choice. Anakin's death does not prove he failed a cosmic destiny. It proves that lives cannot be reduced to roles assigned by institutions or visions. The Jedi Order has to confront that lesson institutionally. Order 66 nearly succeeds even after months of warning. Many Jedi still die because the Order allowed itself to become embedded inside a military designed by its enemy. The Council cannot return to the Temple, declare victory, and pretend the old system worked. Too much evidence says otherwise. A formal convocation is held after the war. Surviving masters, knights, Padawans, healers, archivists, and representatives from Service Corps debate what the Jedi should become. The discussions are painful because reform touches traditions many consider essential to Jedi identity. Yet the war has demonstrated that obedience to tradition can become dangerous when it replaces reflection. The first reform concerns military command. The Jedi renounce permanent generalship. Individual Jedi may assist legitimate defense operations or protect civilians, but the Order will not again become the command cast of a national army. The Senate accepts this partly because it is creating a more decentralized military anyway. The second reform concerns political independence. The Jedi remain based on Coruscant for the immediate future, but their legal relationship with the Chancellor's office is rewritten. No single executive can assign Jedi missions or use them as personal agents. Requests for Jedi assistance pass through transparent channels reviewed by both the Council and civilian authorities. The third reform is more philosophical. Anakin's life and Ahsoka's departure force the Order to re-examine how it teaches attachment. The Council does not suddenly abolish every rule or encourage possessiveness. Jedi still believe fear of loss can become dangerous. What changes is the language. Rather than treating love itself as suspicious, teachers focus more explicitly on the difference between compassion and control, connection and ownership, grief and obsession. Obi-Wan becomes one of the strongest advocates for that distinction. He knows Anakin loved deeply. He also knows secrecy made that love harder to guide. If Anakin had been able to speak honestly about Padme without fearing immediate expulsion, perhaps Palpatine would have possessed less leverage. Obi-Wan cannot know. Reform is not built on certainty. It is built on recognizing where silence created danger. Padme eventually reveals the marriage after Dooku's trial. Keeping it secret no longer protects Anakin, and she refuses to let history remember him only as the Jedi General who died on Ringo Vinda. The revelation shocks the Senate and the Order. Some critics accuse Anakin of hypocrisy. Others accuse Padme of concealing a conflict of interest. Padme accepts the criticism because she believes truth is preferable to preserving a clean myth. Obi-Wan publicly defends them. He states that Anakin violated Jedi rules, but that the failure to speak honestly about the relationship was shared by everyone who recognized it and chose silence. The statement becomes one of the clearest signs that the post-war order will not protect itself by pretending its heroes were flawless. There are no Skywalker twins in this timeline, because Anakin dies during the Season 6 period before Padme's later pregnancy. Luke and Leia are never conceived. The galaxy therefore loses two people who would have become central to the rebellion in the original future. Yet the empire they were needed to defeat never rises in the same form. History does not produce identical heroes because it does not produce the same disaster. Padme remains in public life. Without pregnancy, Mustafar, and the emotional collapse that accompanies Anakin's fall in canon, she survives the Clone Wars physically. Grief changes her, but it does not end her career. She becomes one of the architects of constitutional reconstruction and one of the strongest opponents of permanent emergency authority. Bail Organa works beside her. Mon Mothma becomes increasingly prominent. The political network that would have formed the Rebel Alliance instead becomes a reform coalition inside the surviving Republic. Their task is less romantic than rebellion, but equally difficult. Prevent the government from reproducing the conditions that made Palpatine possible. They introduce term limits on emergency powers, stronger audit requirements for military spending, independent intelligence oversight, and protections for member systems that fear domination by Coruscant. Former separatist worlds participate in a constitutional conference rather than being occupied as conquered territory. Not every grievance is solved. Some worlds remain bitter. Corporate influence remains powerful. The Republic is not transformed into perfection because one Sith Lord dies. But the direction is different. The banking clan and other megacorporations face investigations for financing both sides. Assets linked to illegal wartime manipulation are seized. The Trade Federation loses many of the privileges that allowed it to operate almost like a sovereign government. The Techno-Union's military contracts are dismantled. This weakens the corporate structures that helped make the Separatist crisis possible. Sereno retains local government after Dooku's removal, though his estates are partially confiscated to fund reconstruction. Raxus becomes an important site for reconciliation talks because former Separatist senators insist they were not fighting to install a Sith dictatorship. Padme supports giving them a place in the new settlement, which helps prevent guerrilla resistance from continuing after the droid armies shut down. The droid army itself is deactivated in stages. Republic engineers and former Separatist technicians cooperate to secure command codes. Millions of battle droids become scrap, industrial equipment, or historical evidence. The galaxy slowly demilitarizes after years in which entire economies revolved around war. For Rex, demobilization is almost harder than combat. He was created to be a soldier. Freedom means he now has to decide whether soldier is what he wants to remain. He eventually chooses to stay in service for a time, helping build the new defense force and ensuring clone veterans are not pushed aside by recruited officers who view them as relics. Fives makes a different choice. After the investigations and trials, he retires from frontline combat. He becomes an advocate and investigator focused on clone welfare. The ARC trooper who once broke protocol because no one would listen becomes the person the Republic calls when soldiers claim the system is hiding something from them. Tup does not live to see any of it. His chip malfunction still destroys his mind and body despite the medical effort. That makes him one of the strangest figures in the history of the Republic. He killed Anakin Skywalker, yet almost no one who understands the truth considers him a murderer in the ordinary sense. He was the first clone upon whom Order 66 effectively executed itself before the order was given. Rex insists that Tup's name be included beside Anakin's when the Senate memorializes the victims of the conspiracy. Some senators object because Tup fired the shots. Rex responds that this is exactly why his name belongs there. Tup's body was turned into a weapon against his will. Ignoring that fact would repeat the logic of the people who created the chips. The memorial becomes a place where Jedi and clone veterans stand together. One inscription honors General Anakin Skywalker, killed on Ringo Vinda. Another honors CT-5385 Tup, whose stolen autonomy revealed the mechanism intended to destroy them all. Fives visits more often than he admits. Obi-Wan visits too. His post-war life is radically different without Anakin's fall. There is no exile on Tatooine, no need to watch over Luke, and no belief that the Jedi have been extinguished. Yet Obi-Wan carries grief. He lost Qui-Gon, Satine, and Anakin across the course of his life. The difference is that he does not have to add the belief that Anakin became a Sith who murdered children. He eventually returns to teaching. Ahsoka is one of the reasons. She remains outside the Order at first, uncertain whether reform is enough to restore the trust she lost. Obi-Wan does not pressure her. The Council invites her to participate in reform discussions without requiring her to rejoin. That invitation means more than the old offer to return after her trial, because it does not pretend the Order's failure was secretly good for her. Ahsoka spends time helping communities damaged by the war. She works with former separatists, clones, and refugees. Over time, she becomes a bridge between the Jedi and people who distrust institutions. Whether she formally accepts the title of Jedi again matters less than the role she plays. The Order has survived, but it needs voices willing to stand partly outside it. Yoda changes as well. The Order's near destruction confirms many of the fears he begins confronting during his spiritual journey late in the war. He becomes more willing to acknowledge that the Jedi's own fear of change contributed to their blindness. He does not abandon centuries of teaching. He becomes more humble about the difference between tradition and truth. Mace Windu survives the confrontation with Sidious and remains one of the Council's most formidable members, but even he cannot ignore what happened. His suspicion of Anakin had often been justified by Anakin's behavior, yet the investigation after Anakin's death reveals how heavily Sidious manipulated the young knight. Mace becomes an advocate for clearer boundaries between Jedi and political leaders, precisely because he has seen what happens when the Order allows one chancellor to cultivate private influence over its members. Shaak Ti dedicates herself to clone rehabilitation and medical ethics. Her role on Kamino gave her a front-row view of how easily the Jedi accepted a system because war made it convenient. She supports permanent bans on secret neurological control technologies in sentient soldiers. Kix becomes a leader in clone medicine. Accelerated aging remains an enormous problem. Freedom does not magically give the clones normal lifespans. Research begins into treatments that might slow degeneration or improve quality of life. Kaminoan knowledge is used under oversight rather than discarded completely. The Republic also has to decide what to do with the Jedi prophecy of the Chosen One. Some masters believe Anakin's role was interrupted and the prophecy remains unresolved. Others argue that balance may have been achieved indirectly through his death, because that death exposed Sidious and prevented the Sith from taking control. Yoda refuses to declare a final interpretation. Obi-Wan dislikes the idea that Anakin had to die to fulfill a prophecy. It reduces his friend's life to a mechanism. He tells younger Jedi that Anakin should be remembered for choices he actually made, saving lives, making mistakes, loving people, taking impossible risks, and inspiring clones like Rex to believe they were more than numbers. That memory is complicated because Anakin was complicated. His massacre of the Tusken camp after Shmi's death remains a secret known only to a tiny number of people. His possessiveness and anger do not vanish from history just because he died before becoming Vader. A canonically faithful alternate timeline cannot pretend Anakin was already spiritually safe. If Tup had not killed him, Sidious still had real vulnerabilities to exploit. The tragedy is therefore not that Tup killed a man who was guaranteed to become a hero forever. He killed a man standing at a crossroads he did not yet understand. Anakin might have fallen. He might have resisted. He might have found another path. That uncertainty is what gives the divergence weight. Sidious, by contrast, had certainty. He believed Anakin's vulnerabilities could be engineered into surrender. Tup's malfunction proved that even the most elaborate plan can be destroyed by the machinery used to execute it. The irony would have enraged Palpatine more than anything. He created Order 66 to turn the clones into the weapon that killed the Jedi. One malfunctioning chip activates early and kills the single Jedi he most wanted to preserve. The weapon destroys its creator's greatest future asset before it can destroy its intended targets. That death then causes Rex to investigate. Rex brings Fives. Fives exposes the chip. Shaak Ti prevents Kamino from burying the evidence. Padme turns grief into political scrutiny. Obi-Wan reopens Sifo Dyas. The Pikes connect Tyrannus to the murder. Tyrannus is revealed as Dooku. Clone surgeries begin. The Council discovers the command architecture. Palpatine triggers Order 66 early. The clones refuse in enough places to break the purge. The senior Jedi confront Sidious together. No Anakin arrives to save him. Every consequence comes from the same accident. It is important, however, not to turn Fives into an omniscient savior or the Jedi into suddenly perfect investigators. The conspiracy is exposed because evidence accumulates under circumstances Palpatine cannot control, not because everyone instantly understands everything. Many Jedi still die during the premature Order 66. Many clones still suffer. The Republic nearly collapses. Dooku continues the war. Reform takes years. The victory is costly because Sidious's plan was deeply embedded in institutions, not dependent on one secret switch. That is what makes the scenario more believable than a simple version where Anakin's death automatically saves the galaxy. At first, his death makes everything worse. The Republic loses a brilliant general. The 501st loses its leader. Padme loses her husband. Obi-Wan loses his brother. Ahsoka loses the master she had only recently walked away from. Palpatine becomes more desperate. Separatist offensives intensify. The war becomes unstable. Only because the people left behind refuse to accept the easy explanation does tragedy become warning. Rex could have executed Tup on Ringo Vinda. He does not. Fives could have accepted the Kaminoan diagnosis. He does not. Shaak Ti could have deferred to Nala Se. She does not. Padme could have hidden inside private grief. She does not. Obi-Wan could have treated Sifo-Dyas as an old mystery unrelated to the present. He does not. The Council could have protected military readiness by leaving the chips inside the clones. It does not. Those choices, more than destiny, destroy Sidious. Years later, historians would probably argue about when the Republic was actually saved. Some would say it was the moment Mace Windu struck down Darth Sidious. Others would say it was the Senate vote that stripped the Chancellor's emergency authority. Clone veterans would point to the first successful chip removals. Jedi scholars might focus on the discovery that Dooku was tyrannous. Rex would say it happened on Ringo Vinda when he looked at Tup after the shooting and decided his brother deserved an explanation before punishment. Fives would probably say it happened on Kamino when a medical droid found something inside Tup's head that was never supposed to be questioned. Padme would never call Anakin's death salvation. She would hate anyone who reduced him to that. But she would spend the rest of her career making sure the government learned from what followed. The Republic that emerges is still imperfect. Corruption does not disappear. Systems still argue over taxation and representation. Former separatists resent Coruscant. Core worlds retain advantages Outer Rim planets do not. Criminal syndicates survive. Maul remains a threat somewhere beyond ordinary politics. The dark side itself is not destroyed merely because Sidious dies. But the specific Empire Palpatine planned never exists. There is no Emperor Palpatine presiding over a militarized Senate. There is no Darth Vader hunting survivors. There is no Inquisitorius built around broken Jedi. There is no centralized stormtrooper machine replacing clones as tools of occupation. There is no Death Star project protected by an imperial state in the same form, though dangerous weapons research begun during the war may still exist and must be dismantled. The Jedi remain numerous enough to participate openly in that work. They investigate superweapon projects, protect former separatist scientists willing to cooperate, and help secure worlds where military stockpiles threaten civilians. Their survival changes the cultural memory of the Clone Wars. Instead of becoming mysterious traitors erased by imperial propaganda, they become an institution publicly forced to account for its own wartime failures. That accountability may be the most important long-term difference. In canon, Order 66 prevents the Jedi from learning institutionally from the Clone Wars because almost everyone who could participate in reform is dead. Survivors learn individually in exile, but there is no order left to change. Here, the near miss creates the possibility of collective learning. Younglings who survived the Temple assault grow up hearing exactly how close the Order came to extinction. They are taught the name Fives alongside the names of famous Jedi, because a clone's refusal to stop asking questions saved their lives. They study Anakin Skywalker not merely as a heroic general, but as a warning about the dangers of placing Jedi identity inside military celebrity and political manipulation. Clone cadets are no longer bred after the war, but children across the Republic learn about the clones as citizens rather than equipment. Memorials list names where old procurement documents listed numbers. Veterans choose family names, careers, homes, and communities. Some settle together because no one else fully understands accelerated aging. Others disappear into civilian life precisely because they are tired of being symbols. Rex eventually leaves active service. He has spent enough of his life wearing armor for governments. He remains connected to the Jedi, especially Ahsoka, but that friendship is now built without the shadow of an empire or the guilt of having nearly killed her under Order 66. They sometimes talk about Anakin, usually in ways that would annoy him if he could hear them. They remember his reckless flying, impossible plans, refusal to follow orders, and absolute certainty that Rex could somehow solve whatever problem Anakin created. The memories hurt less with time, though they never stop hurting completely. Fives jokes that Anakin would hate having a government building named after him. Rex says Anakin would love it if the building had a hangar. Those ordinary memories keep him human in a galaxy eager to turn him into either prophecy or martyr. Padme eventually visits the 501st Veterans without cameras. She tells Rex that Anakin spoke about him often. Rex tells her that the men knew there was someone Anakin was always trying to get back to, even if no one asked questions. For the first time, Padme can speak as Anakin's widow to someone who understood a different part of his life. She gives Rex one of Anakin's old mechanical tools rather than a ceremonial object. It feels more appropriate. Anakin was never happiest in formal robes or Senate chambers. He was happiest with something broken in front of him and the confidence that he could make it work. The Republic itself spends decades trying to do the same thing. Not every reform lasts. Future politicians challenge limits. Future crises tempt senators to centralize power again. That is unavoidable. No constitutional system becomes immune to authoritarianism because it survived one Sith conspiracy. The difference is that Palpatine's example becomes part of living institutional memory rather than a secret suppressed by the regime he created. Whenever a chancellor asks for extraordinary military authority, someone can point to the Clone Command scandal. Whenever intelligence agencies demand unreviewable secrecy, someone can point to Tyrannus. Whenever politicians argue that emergency powers must remain because danger never truly ends, Padme's speeches are quoted back at them. The lesson becomes cultural. Fear is exactly when oversight matters most. For the Jedi, the lesson is similar. War may sometimes be unavoidable, but becoming soldiers should never become the easiest way to define their purpose. They rebuild service corps, mediation programs, exploration missions, and local temples beyond Coruscant. More Jedi spend years embedded in ordinary communities, rather than living almost entirely inside the capital. That decentralization makes the Order less politically impressive and more difficult for any single government to capture. Ahsoka helps shape that approach even without returning formally. She argues that Jedi should know people who are not senators, generals, or diplomats. Her months in Coruscant's lower levels after leaving the Order taught her how invisible ordinary suffering can become from the temple towers. The Reformed Order takes that criticism seriously. Obi-Wan eventually sits on a council very different from the one that sent children into command positions at the beginning of the war. He keeps Anakin's old lightsaber in the archives rather than carrying it as a relic. There is no Luke to receive it. The weapon is displayed beside records of the inhibitor chip crisis as part of an exhibit about the final year of the Clone Wars. Visitors see a simple explanation. Anakin Skywalker was killed when clone trooper Tup's behavioral control implant malfunctioned on Ringo Vinda. The investigation into his death exposed the hidden program later used in an attempted extermination of the Jedi Order. That sentence cannot capture what happened to the people involved. It cannot capture Padme sitting alone in an apartment, unable to call herself a widow. It cannot capture Rex pinning Tup to the floor while Anakin died behind him. It cannot capture Fives realizing every clone carried the same object. It cannot capture Obi-Wan hearing that his brother was gone. It cannot capture Sidious discovering that the weapon he built had destroyed the apprentice he wanted before he could claim him. But history often compresses lives into a sentence. The deeper truth is that Tup's malfunction would expose the contradiction at the heart of Palpatine's entire strategy. Sidious believed absolute control was strength. He built armies whose obedience could override identity. He manipulated institutions by making them dependent on secret mechanisms only he understood. He groomed Anakin by trying to turn love into fear and fear into obedience. Every part of his plan depended on people becoming predictable under pressure. Tup proves control can fail. Rex proves loyalty can be chosen. Fives proves obedience can be questioned. Padme proves grief can become political courage instead of fear. Obi-Wan proves loss does not have to become vengeance. The Council proves an institution can survive only if it is willing to admit that its assumptions were wrong. And Anakin, without ever knowing what his death caused, becomes the event that forces all of them to choose before Sidious can choose for them. If Anakin survived Ringo Vinda, the canonical road toward revenge of the Sith would still be open. He would continue fighting, continue trusting Palpatine, continue carrying unresolved fear, and eventually learn Padme was pregnant. Sidious would have the exact emotional crisis he needed. Fives would be isolated and killed. The chip conspiracy would be buried. Dooku would die aboard the Invisible Hand. Anakin would become Vader. The Temple would fall. The Republic would become the Empire. In this timeline, none of those events can unfold the same way because the first domino falls in the wrong direction. Tup raises his rifle too early. He kills the one Jedi Order 66 was never supposed to kill, and by doing so, he gives the rest of the galaxy enough time to discover what the Order was built to do. That is the cruel paradox at the center of this alternate history. Anakin Skywalker's death is an enormous loss. It deprives the galaxy of his potential, Padme of her husband, Obi-Wan of his brother, Ahsoka of her master, and the 501st of the general who taught them to improvise. It erases the possibility of Luke and Leia being born in the same way. It creates military setbacks and grief that never fully disappears. Yet Palpatine's victory depended on Anakin surviving long enough to become his weapon, and on the clone chips remaining secret long enough to kill the Jedi. Tup destroys both conditions in a single moment. The Chosen One never becomes Darth Vader. Fives lives long enough to prove he was right. Rex never turns his blasters on Ahsoka. Cody never orders Obi-Wan's death. The 501st never marches behind a fallen Anakin into the Jedi Temple. Mace Windu never faces Sidious while depending on the decision of a terrified young man standing behind him. Yoda and Obi-Wan never return to a burning temple to discover that their greatest friend destroyed it. Padme never watches the Republic become an empire while the person she loves disappears behind a mask. The galaxy still pays a terrible price, but it pays that price before the Sith can convert tragedy into total control. And perhaps that is why Tup's story is already one of the most tragic pieces of the Clone Wars even without this alternate timeline. He was bred to obey, fought beside men he considered brothers, and then became the first clone destroyed by the secret command hidden inside all of them. He had no idea what Order 66 was. He had no political ambition and no hatred of the Jedi. His mind was simply taken from him. Change the Jedi standing in front of him from Tippler to Anakin Skywalker, and the entire structure of Star Wars changes. The most important man in Sidious's future dies before Sidious can corrupt him. The most important secret in Sidious's army becomes impossible to ignore. And the clone trooper remembered as the first victim of a malfunction becomes the accidental catalyst that prevents the Sith from ruling the galaxy. Thanks for watching. If there are any other Clone Wars alternate timelines, characters, battles, or turning points you want us to explore, leave your ideas in the comments below. Until the next video.